Heckling. We'll talk about the subject of heckling, and of course, I have the Senator Lydia Fort, my apologies, in mind. This is a picture of her stunt on the cover of the Daily Telegraph, the same edition I've just used for talking about the Chris Kaba case. Um, the good news is the consensus in Australia seemed to be against her outburst. Even Republicans recognised that it was unparliamentary, it was discourteous. Um, but I want to get into the wider issue of heckling, the pros and cons that, you know, I mean, on one hand, she achieved what she wanted to do. She's got a lot more attention. Something else has come out, though. She apparently tweeted or put on social media an image of the king's head decapitated, and saying, we want a Republican. And that's in very bad taste for a man who's recovering from cancer. I just think it's in bad taste generally. She also apparently was verbally berating clients um, outside a lap dance club. This is a woman who seems to be relish making a name for herself for being outspoken and for basically making a scene. Um, I understand there's moves to have her censured by Parliament. I do think when it comes to Parliament, and remember Australia is based on the British Westminster system of government, um, there should be certain parliamentary standards. Now, I do believe people should be able to voice their opinion, and I wouldn't want a situation where parliamentary standards are such that members of Parliament, senators, are kind of overtly self-censorious. That would be wrong. I think MPs, senators have to be able to speak their mind candidly, including voicing anger. Um, However, if it just becomes a free for all, if people just yell and shout and heckle, then clearly that is going to just go to the dogs. It's going to degrade what should be um, a body for debating important issues. So, what's my thoughts on heckling? Well, when I made the video on this, I did make the point that I would be a hypocrite if I said I was against all heckling. Now, the thing about Lydia Thorpe's outburst is not so much the issues she was raising. She was talking about the F the colonists. She said, "You're not our king." She said, she was talking about genocide and the issues affecting Aboriginal people. I mentioned that the if I could find this now, it's in the main report anyway. Um, Nova Peris, who is the first Aboriginal woman to be elected to the Australian Parliament, she's a Republican. And she would probably agree with some of the points that Ford was making, but she clearly disapproved of the way she was doing it. A lot of other Aboriginal elders have spoken out. I'm sure some will support her as well. But the consensus in Australia seems to be Republican and monarchist people have rebuked her grandiose display, her very egotistical display, and she had this rather pathetic image of her raising the fist as if she was Tiananmen Tank Man. The thing about all of this is I don't think the king deserves this sort of vitriol because he has himself shown he is open minded, he's willing to speak to Republicans. He's clearly said he will respect whatever decision the Australian people make. So Charles is not a dictator. He's not coming in and dictating you must bow to me. In fact, I think he'd probably be embarrassed by that. He's a constitutional monarch. He's not an absolute monarch. Um, but regardless of whether you agree with Thorpe or not, it's the way she went about it. I think that backfired, and I think people, she's acting more like a radicalized protester than an elected member of parliament or an elected senator. Um, but on the issue of heckling in general, look, I would be a hypocrite if I said I'm against it all. If I saw a Chinese human rights activist heckling Xi Jinping, I would honestly say, yeah, that person's brave. And I will say this about Forbes. I guess it took a degree of pluck, sticking your neck out like that. A degree of pluck. I won't go so far as to call her courageous. I think that's pushing it. It takes a degree of pluck being unpopular. So I'll give her that, but I still think it was in bad taste. I thought it was just grandiose exhibitionism. I mean, nothing serious is going to happen to her. She may lose her Senate seat. But no one's denying her freedom of speech. No one's saying you can't have this opinion. It's just the way she went about it. It just came across as rude, as Prime Minister Albanese said. Um, the King and Queen themselves looked unfazed, apparently. And I would say it's unfortunate that she has got so much attention because I would say their tour was largely positive. You know, they got clearly warm crowds in Samoa. They were greeted with, in a really warm way. It was a big thing for Samoa. You know, it's a small country. I would say it was largely a positive tour. But more broadly on the issue of heckling, the point that the heckler wants to get across, regardless of who the subject is, whether it's a politician or a comedian that they don't like or a celebrity that they don't like, the point that the heckler wants to get across is probably twofold. It's to express your own dislike of the person, but it's also to raise awareness of issues that they feel are being ignored. Now, Ford claimed that her letters to the king were ignored. Maybe they were. Um, but she is a senator, you know, there is a certain standard of behaviour, and is heckling the right way to represent her constituents? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Um, you know, what makes her think that she alone has the right to dictate whether the king comes to Australia or not? Um, the thing about heckling, like I say, it can sometimes be lost. That the point that the heckler's trying to get across can be lost because the optics of it can just look rude. And the problem is, I mean, I don't think Charles deserves a vitriol, but let's say you have a dictator, someone like Xi Jinping or Putin, who I certainly would applaud a heckler in those situations. There is a risk that people will just say the heckler is being rude and they're drowning out other opinions. Of course, this is ironic in the case of a dictator being heckled because in the domestic situation, they absolutely crush all opposition. Mark Rosenberg of the BBC certainly wasn't heckling. He challenged Putin today on the invasion of Ukraine, and Putin had a tantrum. Putin knows full well he can't go around poisoning BBC journalists. I'm sure he would love to, but fundamentally, dictators are insecure. Now, I do think it takes guts to challenge power. There was another Australian involved in the heckling incident recently, someone who I happen to respect, Drew Pavlo. He is an Australian of Greek Cypriot descent, I believe, and he heckled Tucker Carlson, who's given a speech, I believe, in Sydney. And he held up the Ukrainian flag and heckled Carlson for being Putin's lackey, basically. I thought that was brave because Carlson's stooges, his fanboys and fangirls, will of course round on on Drew Pavlo. I think he got arrested over that incident. I think Tucker Carlson is a POS, but that's my own opinion. I think he's a disgrace to journalism. But I know it would be hypocritical of me to say, well, I agree with this person, so I support that heckling, but I disagree with that person, so I'm against that heckling. The real issue is here is what does heckling achieve? Would I do it myself? I'll be honest, I've often pictured myself heckling a particular legislator or a particular figure that I disagree with, and I wonder, A, would I have the guts to do it, and B, what would it actually achieve? I think part of the problem with heckling is it draws more attention to the heckler than to the causes they are trying to put forward. Now, I appreciate the argument that sometimes cases try to be raised, particular situations try to be raised, and they're routinely ignored by bureaucracy. So sometimes there might be an argument that heckling is the only way to get attention. But the negative side of that would be it just looks infantile, it looks exhibitionist. Suppose it's the same argument against, or a similar argument against the likes of Just Stop Oil and Co., who they claim the only way they're getting attention on climate change is by their criminal stunts. Now, I don't think that heckling is in the same category as vandalizing priceless work of art. I don't think it's in the same category, but fundamentally it is rude. Um, Sometimes the target absolutely deserves it. That's my own opinion, right? But I'm aware that I can't be a hypocrite and say, well, I support this heckling, but not that heckling. I don't think Charles deserved it. That's my own opinion. But um, I mean, what could Ford do to express herself in a better way? She didn't have to go. She didn't have to listen to the king. She could have, organized a peaceful protest against his visit. Um, I think the problem with her little stunt was it's just drawn attention to her. It makes her look rather egotistical. If she'd organized a peaceful Republican protest, that would be completely valid. Um, I suppose she might argue, oh, well, the king wouldn't hear that. I guess that's true. I guess she would argue he heard it this way. I still think it was quite an obnoxious stunt. I don't get a good impression from her, because this isn't a one-off. She has a track record of, and I think the thing about showing a decapitated king, and not just any king, specifically Charles, I think that was in very bad taste. I mean, I think that's just, I don't know what she thinks she's pulling with that. She's also a hypocrite though, because she signed an oath of loyalty to the crown when she became a senator. So there's certain ways to go about it. Anyway, I'm leaving the open question here. What do people think of heckling? Um, Heckling has a long tradition, and I certainly wouldn't say it should be totally outlawed or something like that because it is an aspect of free expression. One thing about heckling, though, if say you have a debate forum, say question time, right, and a heckler gets up and starts yelling at a politician, the problem with that is, I mean, if they haven't been asked to put forward a question, part of the problem with heckling, it can be deemed to be selfish because it's actually taking away the opportunity for others to speak and for others to raise questions and to challenge those in power. It is a bit grandiose and exhibitionist in that sense. I mean, I remember when there were hecklers at question time, I'm thinking, well, wait a second, the other people have questions as well. And by just yelling and ranting, that's drowning out other questions. I do think that in talk shows, whether it be question time or any questions, um, it's coming to Sunderland this week, actually. I don't know if I'll have time to go to that, but I do think that there shouldn't be censorship in what sort of questions can be asked. I think there is public suspicion sometimes that, oh, it's like pre approved questions and stuff like that. I think there has to be a lot of flexibility, and if questions are quite pointed and sharp, so be it. I do believe in that, and I do believe I've long argued that institutions have to listen. I think too many institutions are detached. That might include the monarchy, but I still think that the way she went about that just looked obnoxious, and so it backfired. In the end of the day, Charles was a visitor. That's not the way to treat a visitor. Whether you agree with him or not. Um, Particularly one who has been open-minded and he wants dialogue. Charles is very, very aware of the sensitivities within the Commonwealth, including around Indigenous people. I'm not saying that everything she raised is totally invalid, but it's the way she went about it. So let me know your thoughts. Heckling, yay or nay? I'm not going to say I'm totally against it. I'd be a hypocrite if I said I was. I just think in certain circumstances it can look more exhibitionist than productive. But I will say that anyone who heckles a dictator, um, like Putin or Xi Jinping, I'm not going to lie, they get my respect. I think that is genuinely a brave thing to do.